The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Horse Guards Parade as adjusted his camera strap nervously. At 62, he had dreamed of visiting London for decades, and now, standing before the iconic red-uniformed guards, he felt overwhelmed by the weight of history surrounding him. His wife stood beside him, her gentle hands folded in front of her traditional kimono, which she had chosen specifically for this moment. Their daughter, 28 and fluent in English, served as their translator and guide, though she too seemed moved by the solemnity of the scene before them. The family had arrived in London 3 days earlier as part of a cultural exchange program between their of Kyoto and the British capital. A retired tea ceremony master had spent months studying British royal traditions and military history in preparation for this trip. He understood the deep significance of the King's Guard, not just as tourist attractions, but as living symbols of centuries of duty, honor, and sacrifice. This understanding came from his own cultural background, where respect for tradition and service held profound meaning. As they approached, the guards standing at attention noticed the perfect stillness of the young soldier before them. The guard, whose nameplate read, stood motionless despite the growing crowd of tourists around him. Some visitors were taking selfies, others were making loud jokes but remained focused, his eyes fixed straight ahead, his rifle held with practiced precision. Felt a deep respect for this level of discipline and dedication, recognizing in it the same spirit that guided the samurai of his ancestors. Had been observing quietly, her artist's eye taking in every detail of the guard's uniform, the intricate patterns of the bearskin hat, and the polished boots that reflected the morning light. She had brought her sketchbook, hoping to capture not just the visual elements but the essence of duty and honor she witnessed. As a calligraphy teacher back home, she appreciated the meditation-like quality of the guard's stance, the way he seemed to transcend the chaos around him through sheer focus and commitment. Watched her parents with growing admiration. She had worried that the trip might be too much for them, that the language barrier and cultural differences would create stress rather than joy. Instead, she saw them connecting with something universal in the guard's dedication, something that spoke to their own values of respect, discipline, and service to something greater than oneself. She began to understand that this moment was becoming more meaningful than any of them had anticipated. The crowd around them continued to grow, and noticed that many tourists seemed to view the guards as living statues rather than human beings performing a sacred duty. She watched as people tried to make the guards laugh, waved objects in front of their faces, and posed for increasingly inappropriate photos. Each time this happened, she saw her father's expression grow more serious, his jaw tightening slightly in the way it did when he was troubled by disrespect in his own tea ceremonies. Had served briefly in Japan's self-defense forces in his youth, and he recognized the mental strength required to maintain such composure under constant scrutiny. He thought of the young men and women who chose this path, dedicating themselves to protecting their monarch and country through this ancient ceremony. The parallel to his own country's imperial guard was not lost on him, and he felt a kinship with these soldiers that transcended nationality and language. As the morning progressed, the family positioned themselves at a respectful distance, simply observing and appreciating. They noticed that had been standing for nearly an hour without moving, his face showing no sign of strain or discomfort. Began sketching, her hand moving with the same deliberate precision she brought to her calligraphy. Each line she drew was an act of reverence, a way of honoring what she witnessed. Other tourists came and went, but the Japanese family remained, their presence becoming a constant in his peripheral vision. Though he couldn't acknowledge them directly, he began to sense something different about these particular visitors. There was a quality to their stillness, their quiet observation, that set them apart from the constant stream of cameras and commentary. Their respect was palpable, and it provided a small comfort during what could often be a challenging duty. Noticed a small incident that would stay with her for years. A young tourist had dropped his phone while trying to take a selfie with the guard, and the device clattered loudly on the cobblestones. Several people laughed, and someone made a joke about the guard not even flinching, but saw something in his eyes, a micro-expression of concern for the person's property, quickly suppressed as duty demanded. It was a reminder that beneath the uniform and ceremony was a caring human being. The sun climbed higher and realized they had been watching for over 2 hours. In that time, he had witnessed something beautiful, the intersection of ancient tradition and modern dedication. He thought of his own students back in Kyoto, how he taught them that true mastery came not from flashy demonstrations, but from quiet, consistent devotion to one's craft. Embodied this principle perfectly. Closed her sketchbook, satisfied that she had captured not just the guard's appearance but something of his spirit. She looked at her husband and daughter, and in their eyes she saw the same deep respect that filled her own heart. They had come to London as tourists, but they were leaving this place as witnesses to something profound and timeless. As they prepared to move on to other parts of their tour, made a decision that would change not only the rest of their trip, but touch the lives of everyone they would encounter in the days to come. He turned to and spoke quietly in Japanese, his words carrying the weight of a formal request. He wanted to do something to show their appreciation, something that would honor both the guard they had observed and the institution he represented. Listened carefully to her father's proposal, her eyes widening slightly as she understood the full scope of what he was suggesting. It would require careful planning and coordination, and there was no guarantee it would be well received. But as she looked back at, still standing with perfect discipline after hours of duty, she knew her father was right. Some gestures transcended cultural boundaries, and respect was a language everyone could understand. The family gathered their belongings and bowed slightly toward before departing, a gesture so subtle that most observers missed it entirely. But the guard noticed, and for just a moment, the corner of his mouth lifted in the slightest suggestion of a smile. That small acknowledgement would fuel's determination to create something special, something worthy of the dedication he had witnessed. As they walked away from Horse Guards parade, the family carried with them not just memories and photographs, but a mission. They had encountered something pure and noble in service, and they felt called to respond in kind. The next 3 days of their London visit would be devoted to preparing a gesture of respect that would honor the guard, his fellow soldiers, and the ancient traditions they upheld. Behind them continued his duty, unaware that his simple dedication to service had set in motion events that would soon touch his heart and remind him why he had chosen this path. The encounter with the respectful Japanese family had already begun to restore his faith in the meaning of his role, but what was to come would exceed anything he could have imagined. The morning that had begun with routine duty had become something more, a bridge between cultures built on the foundation of mutual respect and recognition of shared values. As London's busy streets swallowed the departing tourists and new crowds gathered around the guards, the stage was set for an extraordinary demonstration of international friendship and honor that would soon unfold in ways none of them could have predicted. That evening, the family gathered in their modest hotel room near Square, the events of the morning still fresh in their minds. Sat cross-legged on the floor, having moved the furniture to create a proper space for contemplation, while prepared tea using the portable set they had brought from home. The familiar ritual brought them comfort and clarity as they discussed what they had witnessed and what they felt compelled to do in response. Translated as her father explained his vision with growing passion. He wanted to organize a formal ceremony of respect for the King's Guard, something that would honor their service while sharing Japanese traditions of gratitude and recognition. The idea was ambitious and would require navigating complex protocols, but felt strongly that such a gesture would create meaningful connections between their two cultures. The first challenge was understanding the proper channels for such a request. Spent hours researching online, making phone calls, and sending emails to various government offices, tourist information centers, and cultural organizations. Many initial responses were polite but dismissive, with officials explaining that the guards were not permitted to interact with tourists beyond their official duties. However, persistence and careful explanation of her father's intentions gradually opened doors. Meanwhile, worked on creating something tangible to accompany their gesture. She had brought high-quality paper and ink from Japan, and she began crafting a series of calligraphy pieces that would express their gratitude in both Japanese and English. Each character was formed with meticulous care, transforming their hotel room into a temporary studio where ancient art met modern diplomacy. The breakthrough came through an unexpected connection. Doctor, a professor of East Asian Studies at University College London, had been contacted by one of the cultural offices had reached out to. Doctor had spent years in Japan studying tea ceremony and understood the depth of meaning behind's proposal. She agreed to meet with the family the next morning and serve as a cultural bridge to help make their vision reality. The meeting took place in Doctor's office, surrounded by books about Japanese culture and photographs from her time in Kyoto. As translated between her parents and the professor, something beautiful happened. Doctor recognized in a kindred spirit someone who understood that cultural exchange at its best was about recognizing shared human values rather than highlighting differences. Doctor explained that while the guards themselves could not participate in unofficial ceremonies, there were protocols for cultural presentations that could be arranged through the Ministry of Defense and the palace. She offered to make some preliminary inquiries, but warned that the process could take weeks or months. His face fell slightly as he realized their trip would end long before any official ceremony could be organized. Seeing his disappointment, Doctor suggested an alternative approach. While they couldn't arrange a formal ceremony with official participation, they could create a meaningful gesture within the existing framework of tourist interaction. She proposed working with local Japanese cultural organizations to arrange a peaceful demonstration of respect that would honor the guards without disrupting their duties or violating protocols. The idea energized the family. They spent the rest of that day and the next working with Doctor and representatives from the Japanese Cultural Center to plan something unprecedented. Word began to spread through London's Japanese community, and volunteers stepped forward to participate in what was becoming a grassroots movement of cultural appreciation. Back at Horse Guards Parade, continued his duties, unaware of the preparations taking place across the city. However, other guards had begun to notice the Japanese family's daily visits. Unlike typical tourists who came and went quickly, they returned each day, always maintaining respectful distance and behavior. Their consistent presence had become a small but notable part of the guards' routine. Sergeant William Davies, superior, made discreet inquiries about the family after several guards mentioned their respectful demeanor. Security protocols required attention to any individuals who displayed unusual patterns of behavior, even seemingly benign ones. However, the investigation revealed only positive interactions and growing admiration from other tourists who had observed the family's reverential approach. The cultural preparation intensified as more members of London's Japanese community became involved. Mr., a businessman who had lived in London for 20 years, offered to coordinate logistics. Mrs., a master of traditional dance, volunteered to lead a performance element. Even Japanese students from various London universities asked to participate, seeing an opportunity to share their culture's values of respect and gratitude. His calligraphy project expanded as well. What had begun as a personal expression of gratitude grew into a collaborative artwork involving multiple Japanese artists living in London. Each contributed elements that reflected their own interpretation of the respect they felt for the guards' service. The final piece would be a scroll combining traditional poetry, visual art, and expressions of friendship between Japan and Britain. Found himself taking on an unexpected role as the spiritual leader of the growing movement. His background in tea ceremony had taught him how to create moments of profound meaning through careful attention to detail and proper observance of form. He applied these principles to planning the gesture, ensuring that every element would communicate respect rather than spectacle. Doctor worked behind the scenes to ensure that appropriate officials were aware of the planned gesture, and that it would not be misinterpreted as a security concern or publicity stunt. She drafted careful explanations of the cultural significance of what was being planned, emphasizing the sincere motivation behind the effort and the positive impact it could have on international relations. As word spread through the Japanese community, the gesture began to take on significance beyond what any of them had initially imagined. Japanese business leaders, diplomats, and cultural figures expressed interest in participating or supporting the effort. What had started as one family's personal response to witnessing dedication and service was becoming a statement about the power of respect to transcend cultural boundaries. The logistics proved challenging. Coordinating dozens of participants, managing timing, and ensuring appropriate behavior required careful planning and communication. Found herself serving as the primary coordinator, her language skills and cultural knowledge making her the natural bridge between her father's vision and its practical implementation. Throughout this period, the family continued their daily visits to Horse Guards Parade. Each day, they observed, and his fellow guards with growing appreciation for the mental and physical demands of their service. They witnessed the guards' professionalism in dealing with difficult tourists, their composure in all weather conditions, and their unwavering commitment to their duties. Began to anticipate the family's arrival each morning. While he couldn't acknowledge them directly, their respectful presence had become a source of strength during long hours of standing guard. Other tourists might see the guards as curiosities or photo opportunities, but this Japanese family seemed to understand the honor and sacrifice inherent in their service. The final preparations reached a crescendo as the date for their gesture approached. Participants rehearsed their roles, materials were prepared and checked, and contingency plans were developed for various scenarios. The goal was to create something beautiful and meaningful that would honor the guards while demonstrating the depth of Japanese cultural values. As the family prepared for sleep on their final night before the planned gesture, they felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement. They had come to London as tourists seeking to experience British culture, but they were about to become cultural ambassadors themselves, sharing the depth of Japanese traditions of respect and gratitude with a broader audience. Lay awake thinking about the guard they had first observed, wondering if understood how deeply his simple dedication to duty had moved them. Tomorrow would reveal whether their carefully planned response would successfully communicate the respect and admiration they felt. The morning would bring either a beautiful moment of international understanding or an awkward misunderstanding, despite their best intentions. Outside their hotel window, London continued its ceaseless activity, unaware that tomorrow would bring an extraordinary demonstration of how respect and honor could create connections across cultures and continents. The stage was set for something remarkable, something that would touch hearts and remind everyone present of the universal human values that transcend nationality and language. The morning of the planned gesture dawned crisp and clear, with autumn sunlight filtering through the London sky. Woke before dawn, his body following the rhythms of discipline learned through decades of tea ceremony practice. He spent an hour in quiet meditation, preparing his mind and spirit for what lay ahead. This was not merely a tourist activity or cultural performance, but a sacred act of recognition and respect that demanded his full presence and intention. Rose shortly after, moving with the quiet grace of someone who understood the importance of the day. She carefully arranged the completed calligraphy scroll, now mounted on traditional wooden supports and wrapped in silk cloth that had belonged to her grandmother. The artwork represented not just her own efforts, but the collaborative spirit of London's Japanese community, each brushstroke carrying the weight of genuine gratitude and cross-cultural appreciation. Coordinated the final details through a series of text messages and phone calls with participants across London. Doctor confirmed that she would be present to provide cultural context to any officials who might have questions. Representatives from the Japanese Cultural Center had arrived early to help set up the designated area where the gesture would take place, ensuring everything was properly organized and respectful. By 10 o'clock in the morning, nearly 50 members of London's Japanese community had gathered in nearby James's Park. They represented a remarkable cross-section of Japanese life in Britain. Elderly immigrants who had made London their home decades ago, young students studying at British universities, business professionals, artists, and families raising children in both cultures. Each had been moved by the family's vision and wanted to participate in something meaningful. The group included Mr., a different who served as cultural at the Japanese embassy, who had requested permission to attend in a personal capacity. Mrs., a master of traditional kodo music, had brought her instrument to provide appropriate accompaniment. Several members wore traditional clothing, while others chose formal Western dress, all united in their intention to honor the British guards with dignity and respect. And his fellow guards had begun their morning duties as usual, unaware that this day would be different from any other in their military service. Had noticed the absence of the Japanese family during the previous day's preparation activities, and he found himself hoping they would return. Their consistent, respectful presence had become a small but meaningful part of his daily routine, a reminder that his service was appreciated and understood. Sergeant Davies had been quietly briefed about the planned cultural demonstration by his superiors, who had been contacted through Doctor's careful diplomatic channels. While the guards could not participate directly or acknowledge the gesture while on duty, officials had determined that as long as the demonstration remained peaceful, respectful, and did not interfere with tourist access or security protocols, it could proceed. At precisely 11 o'clock, the Japanese group began moving toward Horse Guards Parade in a carefully organized procession. Led the way, carrying the ceremonial scroll with both hands in the formal manner his tea ceremony training had taught him. The group moved with quiet dignity, their behavior immediately distinguishing them from typical tourist crowds through their obvious reverence and purposeful unity. As they approached the guards, something remarkable happened. Other tourists, sensing something significant occurring, began to step back and quiet down. The respectful demeanor of the Japanese group created a natural circle of space around the guards, transforming the usual chaotic tourist environment into something approaching the solemnity the setting deserved. Positioned himself directly in front of, maintaining the respectful distance required while ensuring his gesture would be clearly visible. With careful precision, he unwrapped the calligraphy scroll and held it up for to see. The artwork was breathtaking, traditional Japanese characters expressing gratitude, respect, and friendship, accompanied by English translations that conveyed the depth of appreciation felt by the entire Japanese community in London. Mrs. began playing her coda, the traditional music adding an ethereal quality to the moment that seemed to transport everyone present beyond the ordinary tourist experience. The haunting melody spoke of ancient traditions, honor, and the universal human recognition of service and sacrifice. Even tourists who couldn't understand the cultural significance found themselves moved by the beauty and obvious sincerity of what they were witnessing. Felt his throat tighten with unexpected emotion as he read the English portions of the scroll. The words expressed not just thanks, but genuine understanding of what it meant to serve with honor and dedication. For someone who often felt reduced to a tourist curiosity, this recognition of the deeper meaning behind his service was profoundly moving. Though military discipline prevented him from responding visibly, his eyes conveyed the depth of his appreciation. The other guards were equally affected. Despite their training to remain impassive, each felt the power of being truly seen and honored for their service. The Japanese group's gesture cut through the usual tourist noise and chaos to acknowledge the human beings beneath the ceremonial uniforms, the young men and women who had chosen to dedicate themselves to duty and service. Stepped forward and placed a small origami crane at the base of the guard post, a traditional symbol of peace, hope, and healing. She had folded it from paper made in Kyoto using techniques passed down through generations, and it represented not just her personal gratitude but the prayers and good wishes of her entire community back home in Japan. Addressed the crowd in English, her voice carrying clearly across the sudden stillness that had fallen over the area. She explained the cultural significance of what they were witnessing, how her father's background in tea ceremony had taught him to recognize and honor dedication and service, and how their encounter with the guards had moved their entire community to express gratitude and respect. The response from other tourists was unexpected and beautiful. Instead of resuming their usual photo-taking and commentary, many seemed inspired by the Japanese group's reverence. Some removed their hats in respect, others stood quietly watching, and several were visibly moved by the demonstration of international friendship and appreciation they were witnessing. Doctor observed from a discreet distance, documenting the event for cultural and diplomatic purposes. She recognized that something special was happening, a moment of genuine cross-cultural communication that transcended the usual tourist attraction dynamic. The guards were being honored not as curiosities, but as representatives of values that the Japanese community deeply understood and respected. As the ceremony continued, more elements unfolded with careful timing. Mrs. led a brief traditional dance that conveyed respect and gratitude through graceful movements that required no translation. Young Japanese students read poems they had written about honor, service, and the bridges that respect could build between different cultures. The entire demonstration lasted only 20 minutes, but its impact was profound and lasting. As the Japanese group began to conclude their ceremony, they performed a formal group bow toward the guards, a gesture that conveyed more respect and appreciation than hours of words could have accomplished. The bow was held for a full 30 seconds, creating a moment of perfect silence and recognition. And his fellow guards felt the weight of that collective bow, the sincerity and depth of respect it represented. Though they could not respond directly, each guard seemed to stand a little taller, their bearing reflecting the pride and renewed sense of purpose the gesture had provided. They were reminded that their service had meaning beyond ceremony, that their dedication was recognized and valued by people who understood its true significance. As the Japanese group prepared to depart, they left behind more than just the calligraphy scroll and origami crane. They had created a moment of connection that transcended nationality, language, and cultural differences. Other tourists began approaching the guards with notably more respect and awareness, influenced by what they had witnessed. The ceremony concluded with presenting a formal letter to a palace representative who had quietly observed the proceedings. The letter, written in both Japanese and English, requested that their gratitude be conveyed to the appropriate authorities, and that their gesture be understood as representing the deep respect felt by Japanese people for British traditions of service and duty. As the participants began to disperse, many exchanged contact information and made plans to gather again for reflection on what they had accomplished. The event had created bonds within London's Japanese community and established new connections with British observers who had been moved by what they witnessed. The guards continued their duties, but the atmosphere around Horse Guards Parade had been transformed. The Japanese group's demonstration had created a template for how tourists could honor rather than merely observe, participate rather than simply consume. The ripple effects of their respectful gesture would continue throughout the day and beyond, influencing how others approached this historic site and the dedicated individuals who served there. The days following the ceremony brought unexpected developments that none of the participants could have anticipated. Word of the Japanese community's respectful gesture spread rapidly through both official and social media channels, capturing the imagination of people around the world who were hungry for examples of genuine cross-cultural understanding and appreciation. Found himself at the center of international attention, though he maintained his professional demeanor and continued his duties with the same dedication that had first impressed the family. During his off-duty hours, however, he was deeply moved by the messages of support and appreciation that began arriving from Japan and around the world. The ceremony had reminded him why he had chosen military service and given new meaning to his daily responsibilities. The family's final day in London was spent visiting with new friends from the Japanese community and reflecting on how their simple gesture of respect had grown into something much larger. Doctor invited them to speak at University College London about cultural diplomacy and the power of individual action to create international understanding. Despite his limited English, managed to convey through translation the universal nature of respect and how it could transcend any barrier. Sergeant Davies, who had initially been concerned about the security implications of the planned ceremony, found himself writing a commendation letter about the positive impact the event had on both his guards and the general public. The respectful behavior demonstrated by the Japanese group had established a new standard for tourist interaction that other visitors were beginning to emulate. The ceremony's influence extended beyond Horse Guards Parade to other royal sites throughout London. Guards at Palace, Windsor Castle, and the Tower of London reported noticeable improvements in tourist behavior, as word spread about appropriate ways to show appreciation for the guards' service. The Japanese community's example had created a template for meaningful cultural exchange that was being adopted by visitors from many nations. Mrs. Calligraphy Scroll was formally accepted by palace representatives and would be preserved in the royal archives as an example of international friendship and cultural appreciation. Her artwork had become a bridge between two ancient cultures, both of which valued honor, duty, and service to something greater than oneself. The scroll would serve as a lasting reminder of how art could communicate respect across language barriers. The Japanese Cultural Center in London announced plans to establish an annual ceremony honoring British-Japanese friendship, inspired by the family's gesture. The event would celebrate the shared values that connected the two cultures and provide opportunities for ongoing cultural exchange and mutual appreciation. Back in Japan, news of the London ceremony reached tea ceremony students and the broader community in Kyoto. They were proud of their teacher's representation of Japanese values abroad and inspired by how he had turned a tourist experience into an opportunity for meaningful cultural diplomacy. Several students expressed interest in organizing similar gestures of appreciation for other cultures and traditions. Received an unexpected invitation to visit Japan as part of a cultural exchange program that emerged from the ceremony's publicity. The invitation came from the mayor of Kyoto, who wanted to honor the guard whose dedicated service had inspired such a beautiful demonstration of international respect. While military duties would prevent immediate travel, the possibility represented a remarkable outcome from what had begun as a routine day of guard duty. The social media documentation of the ceremony, shared by Doctor and other participants, reached millions of viewers worldwide. Comments poured in from people expressing hope that such examples of respectful cultural exchange could become more common. Many shared their own experiences of being moved by dedication to duty and service, creating a global conversation about the universal values the ceremony had celebrated. Educational institutions in both Japan and Britain began incorporating the story into curricula about cultural understanding and international relations. The ceremony became a case study in how individual actions could create positive diplomatic outcomes and how respect could serve as a universal language, transcending political and cultural differences. The family's departure from London was emotional and meaningful. At airport, they were seen off by many of the Japanese community members who had participated in the ceremony, as well as Doctor and several British friends they had made during their extended visit. The connections formed through their gesture of respect had created lasting bonds that would continue long after their return to Japan. And his fellow guards continued their duties with renewed sense of purpose and pride. The ceremony had reminded them that their service was noticed and appreciated by people who understood its deeper meaning. The origami crane left by remained its guard post, a small but powerful symbol of international friendship and mutual respect. The ceremony's impact on tourism at Horse Guards Parade was notable and positive. Visitors began approaching the site with greater awareness of its significance and more respect for the guards performing their duties. Tourist guides incorporated information about appropriate behavior and the meaning behind the guards' service, educating visitors about the history and honor represented by these living traditions. Letters of appreciation arrived at the palace from around the world, many inspired by the Japanese ceremony and expressing similar gratitude for the guards' service. The gesture had opened channels for international appreciation that continued to flow months after the original event, demonstrating how one sincere action could inspire countless others. The Japanese embassy in London established a special cultural award honoring the family's contribution to international understanding. The award recognized their role in demonstrating how individual citizens could serve as cultural ambassadors and create positive connections between nations through simple acts of respect and appreciation. Doctor published an academic paper about the ceremony and its aftermath, examining how grassroots cultural diplomacy could complement official international relations. Her research highlighted the power of sincere respect to break down barriers and create understanding between different cultures and traditions. A year later, the annual ceremony at Horse Guards Parade had become an established tradition, drawing participants from many nations who wanted to express their appreciation for the Guards' service and demonstrate their own cultural values of respect and gratitude. The event had grown far beyond its original scope while maintaining the sincere spirit that had first envisioned. Now promoted to corporal, often reflected on how a routine day of guard duty had led to an experience that changed his perspective on service and international friendship. The Japanese family's gesture had shown him that his military service had meaning beyond national borders, and that dedication to duty was recognized and valued by people worldwide who shared similar values. The family returned to London the following year to participate in the anniversary ceremony. They were amazed to see how their simple gesture of respect had grown into an international movement celebrating shared values and cross-cultural appreciation. Now recognized as an unofficial ambassador of cultural understanding, continued to advocate for respect and recognition of service wherever it was found. The story of the Japanese tourists and the King's Guard became a lasting example of how individual actions, motivated by sincere respect and appreciation, could create connections that transcended cultural and national boundaries. It demonstrated that the values of honor, duty, and service were universal human principles that could be recognized and celebrated regardless of nationality or cultural background. The ceremony had achieved something remarkable. It transformed a tourist attraction into a site of genuine cultural exchange and mutual respect. The guards continued their ancient duties with renewed pride. Tourists approached with greater understanding and appreciation, and the bonds between Japanese and British communities in London grew stronger through shared recognition of common values. In the end, what began as one family's respectful observation of dedicated service had become a lasting bridge between cultures, proving that genuine respect and appreciation could create understanding and friendship across any divide. The legacy of that autumn morning at Horse Guards Parade continued to inspire similar gestures of respect and cultural appreciation around the world, demonstrating the enduring power of sincere human connection.